What would you do if you were invisible? Not invisible the way people dream about, not the exciting kind, not the kind with superpowers. The real kind. The kind where you push a mop through a 5-star hotel at 2 in the morning and every person you pass looks straight through you like you are part of the furniture. The kind where your name badge means nothing, your history means nothing, and the only thing anyone sees when they look at you is the uniform. That was me. Amara Cole. Janitor. Single mother. Woman with a past that had been taken from her and a future she was rebuilding one exhausting shift at a time. And on one ordinary night, on the 14th floor of the Grand Celestine Hotel, I heard a baby crying. I should have kept walking. Every sensible part of me said keep walking. The baby was behind a door that belonged to the most dangerous man I had ever stood 3 feet from, a man whose name made other powerful men go quiet, whose tattoos told stories in ink that I did not yet know how to read, whose eyes were so cold they could frost glass in July. I should have kept walking. I knocked instead. And what happened after that door opened changed everything, my career, my safety, my daughter's life, and the locked-up heart of a man who had stopped believing the world held anything worth trusting. This is not a simple story. It does not go the way you think it will. There are betrayals inside that house that I never saw coming. There are people who smiled at me while working against me. There are moments where I genuinely did not know if I would walk out of that estate, and moments where I did not want to. But you need to hear all of it. From the beginning. Because the part that changes everything, the unthinkable thing I did, was not what anyone in that hotel expected from the woman with the mop. Stay with me. Before we go any further, drop your location in the comments right now. Where in the world are you watching this from? I want to know. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please do it now because this story has 25 chapters and you do not want to miss a single turn. Hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and let's go. The baby had been crying for 23 minutes. I knew because I kept checking the clock on my phone, telling myself every 30 seconds that it wasn't my problem. I was a janitor. A woman with a mop, a bucket, and exactly $47 in her bank account until Friday. The Grand Celestine Hotel paid me to keep their marble floors gleaming, not to involve myself in whatever was happening behind the doors of the presidential suite on the 14th floor. But that crying, God, that crying. It wasn't the ordinary fussing of a spoiled child. It was the desperate, breathless wailing of a baby who needed something that nobody in that room knew how to give. I had heard that sound before, in a different life, in a different version of myself that wore scrubs instead of a uniform and carried a stethoscope instead of a cleaning cart. My chest tightened the way it always did when that old life came back to haunt me. I pressed my mop into the bucket and told myself to keep walking. I made it 4 steps before I stopped. The crying cracked into a higher pitch, the kind that happens right before exhaustion takes over, and my feet were already moving back toward that door before my brain caught up. I raised my fist and knocked. 3 firm knocks. Loud enough to be heard over the crying. Silence. Then footsteps. The door opened. He filled the entire frame. That was the first thing I registered. Not his face, not his clothes, just the sheer size of him, the way he seemed to take up space that belonged to the air. He was wearing a white dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up, and every inch of visible skin on his forearms was covered in tattoos, dark, deliberate, traditional Korean artwork that crawled up his neck and disappeared behind his collar. His face was sharp and cold, cheekbones cut like he'd been assembled by someone who wanted to make a point. Behind him, in a crib that probably cost more than my car, a tiny baby screamed with everything he had. The man's eyes dropped to my uniform, then to my face. I watched him decide in real time whether I was worth speaking to. Then the baby screamed again, and something cracked open behind those cold eyes. "Can you help him?" he said. Not a request. Almost a confession. I stepped inside. I didn't think. My hands just knew what to do. I crossed the room, leaned over the crib, and lifted the baby before anyone told me I could. He was maybe 3 months old, his tiny face flushed deep red from crying, his little fists shaking with the effort of it. I turned him slightly on his side against my forearm, supporting his head the way I'd done hundreds of times in a past life, and I began to pat his back in a slow, steady rhythm. I hummed. Nothing specific, just a low, constant sound that gave him something to follow. Within 4 minutes, he went quiet. The silence in that room was almost louder than the crying had been. I looked down at the baby and felt something in my chest pull tight in a way I hadn't felt in 2 years. I looked up. The man was staring at me like I had done something supernatural. A second man stood by the window, younger, harder, with an earpiece and a stillness that told me he wasn't hotel staff. A bodyguard. The baby's mother was nowhere in sight. I gently laid the baby back in the crib, picked up my cleaning cart handle, and turned toward the door. "How much do you want?" I stopped, turned around slowly. The man was holding out a thick fold of cash. I looked at the money, looked at him. "I didn't do it for money," I said. I walked out and pulled the door shut. I was halfway down the corridor before I heard him say something in Korean to the man by the window. Low and deliberate. I didn't speak Korean, but the way he said it made the hair on my arm stand up. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself I would never see him again. I was wrong about that. I was wrong about almost everything that came after that door. My name is Amara Cole, and I used to be someone. 2 years before that hotel corridor, I was a licensed pediatric nurse with 6 years of experience. Then I reported Dr. Marcus Webb, the head of our NICU unit, a man who had never been told no by anyone who mattered. I watched him ignore a critical alert on a premature infant because he was in the middle of a personal call. I documented it. I reported it. Within 2 weeks, a counter-complaint had been filed against me. Negligence, unprofessional conduct, falsified patient records. All fabricated, all supported by people who owed their jobs to Webb. The board suspended my license. The investigation never concluded. It just sat there, open and festering, while I lost my apartment, my reputation, and very nearly my mind. My daughter Maya was 5 at the time. She was 7 now. The Grand Celestine Hotel paid me to be invisible, and I was good at it. My supervisor, Mr. Derek, called me into his office the morning after the presidential suite incident. Someone had complained that a janitor had entered a guest's room without permission. He slid a written warning across the desk with quiet satisfaction. I explained calmly that I had been invited, that the baby was in distress, that I had pediatric training. He told me that was not my job description. I walked out with the warning in my hand and my phone buzzing in my pocket. Unknown number. For words, I know what happened. Then, meet me. I didn't meet him. Not that day. I went to find my friend Joy instead, who worked the concierge desk and had access to systems she was not strictly supposed to access. She pulled up the presidential suite reservation. Shell company. But Joy dug further. She turned the screen toward me. Kang Jun-seo, she said quietly. Korean American. Worth around $4 billion. International shipping, official business. Unofficial business is why I'm saying this very quietly. She opened a second tab. A news article, 8 months old. Wife of shipping magnate Kang Jun-seo dies in collision. Infant delivered by emergency C-section. The woman in the photo had a warm, composed face. Her name was Minji. 7 months pregnant when a car forced hers off a highway at night. She had died protecting the baby with her own body. The infant, a boy, had survived. I thought about the man in that room. The exhaustion behind his eyes. "Can you help him?" said like it was the hardest question he had ever asked. I looked up from Joy's screen. Jun-seo was standing at the far end of the lobby corridor, hands in his pockets, watching me with those dark, unreadable eyes. He had been waiting. He didn't approach me in the lobby. He was too careful for that. That afternoon, a sealed envelope appeared in my employee locker. No name on the outside. Inside, a single typed page, formal, clean, precise. A request. He needed someone to manage his son's care during a flight to New York and for a period after. 2 weeks. His regular caregiver had resigned. Every professional agency he had contacted had declined once they learned who he was. The compensation at the bottom of the page made me sit down on the bench. $10,000. I went home, fed Maya her dinner, helped with her reading, put her to bed, and lay in the dark with my ceiling and my thoughts. On Maya's desk was a school fee notice, 3 months unpaid. On the kitchen counter was a second letter from the electricity company. In my wallet was $47. At 4 a.m., I picked up my phone and texted the unknown number. "I have conditions." The reply came in 11 seconds. "Name them." I typed carefully. I didn't want money first. I wanted him to contact the hospital board and submit whatever resources he had toward reopening my case. In writing. Before I agreed to anything, I sent it. 30 seconds of silence. Then, done. What else? I stared at my phone. He'd agreed in under a minute to something I'd been fighting for 2 years. That should have relieved me. Instead, it made me careful. People who gave things away that easily always wanted something back that you hadn't thought to protect yet. That's all. For now. His response. "Flight is Thursday. Bring whatever you need." He agreed too easily. I knew that every hour between Tuesday and Thursday. I told Joy the plan. I wrote the address on paper and left it with my neighbor, Mrs. Patricia, who watched Maya after school. I photographed every document he'd sent and emailed it to myself. Thursday morning, I took Maya's hand and walked into the lobby. 2 men were waiting by the elevator. Not hotel staff. They didn't pretend to be. They escorted us to a second-floor meeting room. Jun-seo was already there. And Jaemin, I learned the baby's name in that room, was asleep against his father's chest in a carrier, tiny fists curled, face finally peaceful. In daylight, Jun-seo looked different. Still sharp, still dangerous, still carrying that wall of controlled authority. But there were shadows under his eyes that spoke of weeks without real sleep, and the way he held his son, one large hand curved over the baby's back, was not the gesture of a powerful man. It was the gesture of someone terrified of losing another thing. We sat across from each other and negotiated. I was sharper than he expected. I could see it in the slight shift of his posture before each response. His head of security, a solid, watchful man named Suk, stood by the door and tracked me with flat, assessing eyes. Then Jun-seo's phone rang. He glanced at the screen and his face emptied, composure gone, replaced by something raw and cold. He stepped into the corridor. Jaemin woke the moment his father's warmth disappeared. His face crumpled. Suk moved forward, completely lost. I lifted Jaemin from the carrier before Suk reached him, settled the baby against my chest, and hummed. Jaemin stopped crying in under a minute. When Jun-seo came back and saw us, he stopped walking. He stood in the doorway a long moment. Then, change of plans. "I need you for longer than 2 weeks." I said no immediately. He asked me to wait while he made a call. 30 minutes later, my phone rang. The nursing board administrator, calling to inform me my case had been flagged for expedited review following significant new evidence submitted by an anonymous third party. I looked at Jun-seo across the room. He looked back without expression. That was manipulation, I said quietly. It was leverage, he said. There is a difference. 2 weeks becomes a month, I said. And Maya comes with me. She doesn't leave my sight, her own room. Schoolwork continues. If I say we're leaving, we leave. No discussion. He agreed without pausing. That scared me most of all. I called Joy that night. She was quiet for a moment before saying, Amara, I found something else. About how his wife actually died. About what the investigation showed before it was closed. Not over the phone. But please be careful. Not everyone around him is on his side. I held that warning in my chest all the way to New York. The estate outside the city was nothing I had imagined. Not flashy, powerful. Old stone, high ceilings, silence that had been managed as carefully as everything else. Maya pressed her nose to the car window the entire drive, cataloging the koi pond and stone garden paths with complete lack of self-consciousness. Inside, I met the household. Mrs. Bay, the housekeeper, silver-haired, small, with eyes that moved over me the way a customs officer moves over luggage. She welcomed me in the tone of someone doing no such thing. Mr. O, the cook, wide and quiet and kind, slipping Maya a small bowl of honey rice within 20 minutes. Sook, who was everywhere at once. Jaemin thrived from the first full day. I set a proper schedule, feeding times, sleep windows, sensory play, outdoor time with Maya chattering nearby. By day 3, the baby was laughing. Real baby laughter. Jun-seo watched from doorways, never interfering, never fully leaving. On the 4th day, I found a photo album on the nursery shelf, half hidden behind a row of books. I opened it. The woman in the photos had my bone structure. The same wide forehead, the same jawline, the same quality of stillness in her expression. She was not me, but she was close enough that my hands began to shake. Minji. I closed the album and sat on the nursery floor for a long time. I waited until Maya was asleep and Jaemin was down before I went to Jun-seo's study. The door was open. I set the photo album down in front of him, open to that page, and I waited. He looked at the photo, then at me, then at the photo again. She would have liked you, he said quietly. I had prepared for excuses. His honesty knocked everything sideways. I sat across from him and let him talk. He told me what happened the night Minji died. They were traveling back from a private dinner when a car forced them off the highway at speed. Minji had been in the back seat, 7 months pregnant, and she had thrown herself forward to shield the baby instinctively. The emergency team delivered Jaemin at the scene. Minji bled out before they reached the hospital. The official investigation ran 6 weeks and concluded with an open verdict. Inconclusive evidence. No charges. Jun-seo's jaw tightened. I know who gave the order. I have known for months. I am waiting until I have everything so that when I act, it cannot be undone or denied. I walked back to my room and found Mr. O waiting in the corridor, a tea tray in his hands. He held it out without a word, then, almost too quietly to hear, Mrs. Bay was on the phone tonight. I understood what she said. He looked at me steadily. She told someone that the American woman is getting too close. After that, I started paying attention differently. The small things had been there all along, I just hadn't filed them correctly. My morning tray arriving cold. My keycard failing twice at the nursery door. A supply request for Jaemin's rash cream unfulfilled for 3 days. I documented everything. Quietly. Timestamped notes in my phone. Then one morning before Jaemin's feeding, I reached for his reflux medication and stopped. The label was the same. The bottle looked the same. But the seal was broken, and it had been sealed when I'd put it away the evening before, I was certain, because I had checked it myself. I did not give it to Jaemin. I put it in a plastic bag and walked directly to Jun-seo. I placed it on his desk and told him what I noticed. He went very still. The kind of still that has nothing to do with calm. He called Suk in before I finished speaking. I kept Maya and Jaemin in the garden with Mr. O close by while the investigation moved through the estate with fast, quiet efficiency. By afternoon, Suk came back to me. The bottle had been swapped. The substitute wasn't dangerous at the dropper dose, but it was wrong, the kind of wrong that required knowledge of the medication and access to the supply room. Mrs. Bay had that access. But the supply room logs showed a different name. Someone on Jun-seo's inner council had placed a person inside the estate. The enemy was not just outside the walls. I learned about the council 3 days later. 5 family heads. A governing structure in place for decades. 2 of the 5 had decided that Jun-seo's grief had made him vulnerable, and that a Black American woman caring for the heir to the Kang name was evidence of a man who had lost his footing. The eldest, Elder Cho, arrived at the estate without much warning on a Tuesday afternoon. Lean, precise, in his 70s, with a formality that made the air around him feel pressed and ironed. He greeted Jun-seo correctly and ignored me entirely until I came down the staircase with Jaemin, and the baby reached up and patted my face with his open hand, laughing. Elder Cho watched this with cold, calculating eyes. He spoke in Korean, low and deliberate. After he left the room, Jun-seo came to the bottom of the stairs. He said, "You are becoming permanent. That a distraction who takes root becomes a liability." I looked at Jaemin, who was examining my collar button with complete focus. "And what did you say?" I said he was correct. "You already are permanent." Joy called on a Thursday evening, and I took it by the garden wall while Suk stood his usual 15 feet away pretending to look at his phone. Minji's family, the Han family, had publicly blamed Jun-seo for her death from the start. What Joy had found, buried in financial records and company registrations, was a thread. A ghost company, 3 layers removed from anything traceable, but traceable if you knew what you were doing, and Joy always knew. The ghost company had paid a driver. The driver had been documented unofficially, placing his car on that highway that night. The ghost company's founding documents led back, through 2 more shell layers, to a holding group connected to the Han family's business network. "Amara," Joy said carefully. "Minji may have been killed by her own family. Because she chose him." I sat with that for 2 full days. Then I decided Jun-seo needed to know what I knew. Not because it was my place, but because he was building his response to her death on the wrong target, and sooner or later that would cost someone their life. I told him on a Saturday night. He didn't look shocked. He looked like a man who had been carrying the truth alone for a long time, and I had finally said it out loud for him. "I know," he said quietly. "I have known for 4 months. But knowing and proving are different things. And I cannot move until I have proof that cannot be dismantled." Maya noticed everything I was trying not to notice. She always had. She came to me one night while I was writing in my notebook, sat beside me on the bed, and put her hand on my arm. "That man watches you like he's scared you'll disappear," she said. I told her she was imagining things. She accepted this with the patience of someone who knows they are right and is willing to wait. The next afternoon, I found her in the garden with Jaemin on a blanket between them, showing him how to clap, slowly and seriously, both hands, watching him try to copy with that wobbly baby determination. Jun-seo came around the garden path, stopped dead, and stood very still. Maya noticed him after a moment. She looked at him with complete calm and said, "You can come and sit with us. He likes you better when you're not being all scary." Something happened to Jun-seo's face then. The wall dropped all the way down, and underneath it was something so human and unguarded that I had to look away. He laughed. Quiet and real and slightly rusty, like something that hadn't been used in a long time. He walked over and sat at the edge of the blanket, and Jaemin immediately grabbed his finger. That evening, Suk pulled Jun-seo aside after dinner. I was close enough to see Jun-seo's expression shift. The Han family had made contact formal, polite. The kind of polite that is a threat wearing good manners. They knew I was at the estate. The nursing board video call happened on a Wednesday morning in Jun-seo's study, which he offered without being asked. I had prepared. I had organized my documentation, my timeline, my dates. I had a folder of patient commendations from 6 years of work, printed from copies I'd stored in a cloud drive the day the suspension happened, as if I'd known I would need them eventually. The board administrator introduced the panel. For members, they had reviewed newly submitted evidence, security camera footage from the hospital from the night of Dr. Webb's negligence. Footage that had been deleted from the official record, but not from the backup server, which someone with significant resources and legal access had compelled the hospital to produce. The footage showed exactly what I had seen. The ignored alert. The personal call. The delay that put a premature infant at risk. The panel reviewed it. They asked me 4 questions. I answered clearly and without anger, because anger would have given them a reason not to listen. They voted. Unanimous reinstatement. I thanked them and ended the call. I sat at Jun-seo's desk and did not move for 10 minutes. 2 years. 2 years of that thing hanging over me. Jun-seo was in the doorway when I finally looked up. I walked outside to the garden bench and cried, not the quiet, controlled kind I did at night when Maya was asleep, but the real kind, the kind that comes when something you've been holding for so long finally lets go. Jun-seo stayed inside, near the glass door, close enough to be present. When I came back in, he simply said, "It should never have been taken." That was all. But it was exactly enough. That evening, Derek called my personal phone. His voice was tight. Someone had submitted a complaint about him to the hotel management company. He was under internal review. "I don't know who you know," he said, "but this isn't over." He was wrong about that. Derek went to a tabloid. I found out when Joy's name lit up my phone with 7 consecutive messages before 7 a.m. The article had a photo of me taken through the estate gates. My name, Maya's school named specifically. The headline used the phrase mystery woman in the way tabloids use it to mean something else without saying it directly. By noon the article was down from every platform. By 2 p.m. the tabloid had quietly retracted. But the damage had already traveled. My mother called twice. My sister sent a message full of capital letters. And somewhere east of New York, the Han family read it. Elder Cho read it and convened the other 4 council members. By evening, Jun-seo received a formal challenge to his leadership, procedural, filed under the council's internal rules, citing his fitness to lead given his recent decisions and the presence of an unvetted outsider in proximity to the heir. The challenge required a formal hearing within 7 days. Jun-seo told me that night, plainly, and then said, "I need you to trust me through this." I looked at him. "And if it goes badly?" "I don't intend for it to go badly." Not an answer. But the most honest thing he could say. The hearing was scheduled for Friday. Jun-seo spent the days before it in calls and meetings that ended when I walked nearby. Thursday night he came to the nursery and said, without looking at me, "Tomorrow, you don't need to be there." "They're deciding something about me," I said. "Without me. It's the way it works." "That doesn't make it right." He didn't argue with that. I went to bed, lay in the dark, and thought about Minji. A woman who had chosen this man and been killed for it by people who thought they had the right to decide her life. I thought about what it meant to let other people sit in rooms and determine what space I was allowed to take up. Friday morning, I dressed carefully. I put Maya with Mr. O and Jamin in the garden. And then I walked into the room where 5 men sat around a long table, pulled out a chair, and sat down. Jun-seo stared at me. Elder Cho stared at me. I looked at the full table and said, calmly and clearly, I think I should be here for a conversation about me. Nobody asked me to leave. I think they were too surprised to organize the objection in time, and by the moment they recovered, I had already begun to speak. I did not raise my voice. I did not defend Jun-seo or his decisions. I spoke about Jamin, what a 3-month-old baby needs to survive and develop, in clinical terms, because clinical terms are harder to dismiss than emotional ones. I told them what had been missing before I arrived. The consistent attachment figure. The routine. The sensory engagement. The human warmth that no amount of money can hire if the person doing the hiring doesn't know what they're looking for. Then I told them what it had cost me to be in that room. The career I'd lost. 2 years of rebuilding. My daughter's stability sacrificed and rebuilt again. The risk of standing inside a world I had not grown up in and did not fully understand. I made those choices freely, I said. For a baby who needed someone. Not for money. Not for status. Not because of anything your traditions say about what I am or am not permitted to represent. I paused. If my being here offends your tradition, I would ask you to consider carefully what that tradition is actually protecting. Because from where I sit, it is not protecting Jamin. The room was very quiet. Then Park Soo-hyun, the youngest council member, the undecided one, set both palms on the table and stood up. I vote with Kang Jun-seo, he said. The challenge failed. 2-4. 2 against. Park Soo-hyun, the deciding voice. I stood, thanked them for their time, and walked out. In the corridor, I pressed my back against the wall and let my legs shake for 30 seconds, because I had been holding them still through pure will. Behind me, through the closed door, I heard Elder Cho's voice. Low and directed at Jun-seo. Jun-seo found me an hour later. He wants to speak with you, he said. Alone. I set my own terms. A room I chose, a door that opened from my side, Jun-seo informed of the location. Elder Cho accepted without objection. He sat across from me and folded his hands and looked at me a long moment before speaking. I owe you an explanation, he said. His English was careful and precise. Not an apology. An explanation. He told me he had known Minji since she was a child. Her mother had been his wife's closest friend, and when Minji's mother died young, Elder Cho's family stayed close. He had been present at her wedding to Jun-seo, which the Han family had never fully accepted. When she died, he carried a guilt he had not shared, because it was Elder Cho who, 30 years earlier, had first brought the Han family into the syndicate world. He believed Minji's death was connected to decisions he had made long before she was born. My hostility toward you is not about your race or your background, he said. It was the grief of a man who could not bear to watch another woman he cared about disappear into this world. He reached into his jacket and placed a sealed folder on the table between us. This is what my private investigator compiled over the past 8 months. I have not given it to Jun-seo because I feared what he would do with it before he was ready. He pushed it toward me. Give it to him. But be there when he reads it. He will need someone there. I opened the folder after Elder Cho left. The last page named the person who had ordered the car off the road that night. It was not the Han family. It was a council member. One who had stood at Minji's funeral and held Jun-seo's arm. I held that folder for 3 hours before I went to Jun-seo. I needed to be steady. Because he would not be, and one of us had to be. I found him in the study and set the folder down. Elder Cho gave me this. He asked me to be here when you read it. He opened it. He read slowly. He went back and reread the final page. He sat without moving for a long time. Then he said the name. Very quietly. The council member who had stood beside him at the funeral. Who had helped manage Minji's estate. Who had held Jaemin in the hospital 2 days after his mother died. The betrayal was total. Intimate. The kind that retroactively contaminates every memory it touched. He stood. His hands were not steady. Before you go anywhere, I said. One thing. He stopped. Don't become someone Jaemin will have to forgive someday. He looked at me. Really looked. He left the room. I waited. 3 hours later, Suk came to find me. The council member had been taken into custody under the syndicate's internal laws and handed to the full council for formal judgment. Jun-seo had not touched him. Jun-seo came to the nursery an hour after that. He sat on the floor, not the chair, the floor, and leaned his back against the crib. I sat beside him. We didn't speak for a long time. Then he talked the way people talk when they've been holding something so long that the weight of it has become indistinguishable from themselves. He talked about Minji, the private version. The way she laughed too loud in quiet restaurants. The way she argued with complete intensity about small things because she felt everything without a filter. The way she had asked him twice in the last year of her life to find a way out of the syndicate, and the way he had said soon, just a little longer, the thing people say when they cannot bring themselves to choose. He talked about Jaemin, about looking at his son's face and seeing both love and guilt, because Jaemin existed because Minji died, and there was no way to feel one without the other casting a shadow. He talked about me. He said it plainly. That he had not expected me. That he had thought I would be a practical solution. He had not planned for anything else. You love without armor, he said. How do you do that after everything you've survived? I was quiet for a moment. It costs everything, I said. I just decided it was worth it. He reached for my hand. I let him take it. From the nursery doorway, Mrs. Bay stood with a tray. She looked at the two of us on the floor beside the crib. On her face, for the first time, there was no frost. There was something old and worn and private instead. She set the tray just inside the door and left without a word. Mrs. Bay came to me the next morning before anyone else was awake. She knocked quietly, and when I opened the door, she was holding 2 cups of tea and carrying the weight of something she had been preparing to say for a while. We sat in the small seating area at the end of the corridor. She wrapped both hands around her cup. She had been Minji's caregiver from the time Minji was 4 years old, after her mother died. She had raised her, brushed her hair, packed her lunches, sat with her through fevers and first heartbreaks and the long, complicated process of becoming a person. Jun-seo didn't know. Minji had kept it from him deliberately, afraid that people around Jun-seo would use Mrs. Bay as a point of access or pressure. So she had arranged for her old caregiver to join the household staff under a different context, and they had maintained careful distance. When Minji died, Mrs. Bay stayed for Jaemin. Because he was Minji's. My coldness toward you, she said, was not what it looked like. She met my eyes. I could not allow anyone to take her place. Because if her place was taken, she was truly gone. She reached into her cardigan pocket and placed a small, cloth-covered journal on the table between us. She wrote in this during her last week, Mrs. Bay said. The final entry. I think you should read it. I opened to the last page. Minji's handwriting was careful and slightly slanted. The entry was addressed to no one specific, or rather, to someone she did not yet have a name for. It said, "To whoever loves my son after me, please don't be afraid of him. He needs someone who is brave enough to stay." I closed the journal gently. I sat with it in my hands for a long time. My contract had run out. Not dramatically, it just was what it was. The 2 weeks had become more, and the more had become a life, and the life had become one I was living without quite deciding to live it. But the paper agreement was technically expired. Over breakfast, I told Jun-seo quietly that the agreed time was up and that I would be going home by the end of the week. He didn't argue or leverage. He just looked at me steadily and said, "Is that what you want, or what you think is right?" I didn't answer. After breakfast, Maya found me in the garden. She put her head on my shoulder the way she only did when she was about to say something important. "Jamin called me Nuna today," she said. "Older sister." He pointed at me and said it. Just like that. She was crying a little. Trying not to, but she was 7. I held her and looked at the garden, at the koi pond, at the window where I could see Jun-seo inside holding Jamin up to the glass, pointing at us, making the baby look. The nursing reinstatement had come with a job offer, a position at a pediatric hospital 40 minutes from the estate. A real position. Salaried, licensed. An independent life, completely separate from everything in this house. Every sensible part of me said to take it and leave. I called my mother that night to tell her I had made a decision. I told her about the job. I did not tell her about the apartment lease I had signed 2 miles from the estate the week before. Then the Han family filed a family court petition seeking emergency guardianship of Jamin. They cited Jun-seo's criminal associations, the instability of his home environment, and my previously revoked nursing license as evidence of an unvetted presence with a vulnerable infant. They had taken the tabloid article. They had taken my license history. They had built a case from real facts and completely wrong conclusions. They had used my hardest years against a baby who had nothing to do with any of it. I called Dr. Anita Reyes, the board president who had reinstated my license, before I had even finished reading the petition. She said yes before I finished the question. Then I called 3 former colleagues, a parent of a former NICU patient who had once sent a handwritten letter to the board praising my care of her son, and 2 pediatricians who had worked alongside me. Everyone said yes. The courtroom was wood paneling and fluorescent light and the specific weight of things that matter. The Han family's lawyer was polished and aggressive, presenting Jun-seo's past, my revoked license, the tabloid article, 6 estate staff affidavits about instability. Then Jun-seo's legal team responded. Dr. Reyes's letter. Testimony from 4 medical professionals. Jamin's documented health trajectory from the month before I arrived against the 2 months after. Then Jun-seo's lawyer submitted evidence linking the Han family's financial network to the company that paid the driver who ran Minji's car off the road. The Han family's lawyer went a specific, particular shade of pale. The judge flagged it immediately for criminal referral. I was called to the stand. I answered every question about Jamin with the precision of 6 years of clinical training and the love that didn't require any training at all. The court-appointed guardian, who had visited the estate twice, was asked one question by the judge. Is the child thriving? She looked at Jamin in the back of the courtroom, chewing his fist and studying the ceiling lights with great personal interest. Exceptionally, she said. Full custody confirmed. Petition dismissed. Criminal referral issued. Outside on the courthouse steps, Jun-seo stopped walking and turned to face me. I have something to ask you. Not here. Tonight. That evening, the estate was quiet. Maya was asleep. Jamin was fed and drowsy in my arms, making the small sounds of a baby who has decided the world is trustworthy. Jun-seo sat across from me and said he was leaving the syndicate. Formally. Legally. Enough evidence of the council betrayal and the Han family's crime to ensure a clean exit that no one would contest. Jean Park, positioned for leadership for years, would take over. The legitimate businesses would remain Jun-seo's. "I'm not asking you to stay because of Jaemin," he said. "He would have been fine. You would have made sure of that." He leaned forward, his eyes on my face. "I'm asking because I don't want to figure out who I am on the other side of all this without you." I looked at him, then at Jaemin, then back at him. "I already took the hospital job," I said. He waited. "I signed the lease on an apartment 2 miles from here last week." He waited. "I was never really leaving, Jun-seo." He let out a long, slow breath. And then he smiled, not the ghost of one, not the rusty, surprised laugh from the garden. A real, full, quiet smile that rearranged his entire face. Maya shuffled in from the corridor in her pajamas, half asleep, found the nearest warm surface, and curled against Jun-seo's arm without ceremony. He looked down at her, startled, then settled his arm around her like he'd been doing it for years. I thought about a 2 a.m. hallway. A crying I couldn't ignore. A door I almost didn't knock on, not because I was brave, but because something in me had decided, without consulting my fear, that walking past someone in need was simply not something I was built to do. Jaemin sighed in his sleep. Maya was already gone, snoring softly. Jun-seo reached across and took my hand. Outside, the last of the evening light settled over the garden. And for the first time in 2 years, I did not feel like a woman holding her life together by the edges. I felt like a woman who had finally found the center of it. And that's the story of the night I knocked on a door I was never supposed to knock on and found everything I didn't know I was looking for. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that one act of courage can change everything, then you are exactly who this channel is for. Drop a comment right now, tell me where you're watching from, what part hit you hardest, and what you think Amara did that you might not have had the courage to do yourself. I read every single comment. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please do it right now. Hit that subscribe button, turn on your notifications, and come back for the next story. Because they only get better from here. See you in the next one.